To talk about this particular topic, we have amazing speakers out there, and I'd like to call upon them on the stage to begin with Ms. Harriet Brettle, Head of Market Analysis and Business Intelligence, European Space Agency. Mr. Riaz Lamak, lead GVF International Programs, Global VSAT Forum. Kindly be seated. To moderate, I would like to call upon Ms. Aarti Holla-Maini, Secretary General, GSOA, to hand over this.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Welcome everybody to today's closing session. We are closing the day on an extremely important topic, the role of satellite in disaster management and resilient infrastructures. Arguably, satellite services are more important for society today than they have ever been. We have seen that with the pandemic. We are acutely aware of that because of the war that is going on right now. And also we are confronted daily with the consequences and impact of climate change. So I'm delighted to be moderating this discussion with Harriet and Riaz. Thank you so much for joining me. And I'd like to start by saying we know that this is an extremely important topic. It's also obvious to everybody that satellites have a key role to play in it. Nonetheless, there are plenty of obstacles that stand in the way to really deploying satellite services when disasters strike. And I would like to explore some of those with you. So, Riaz, if I can start with you, I wanted to ask you to tell us something about your Pacific Endeavour venture. And I think perhaps you have a video that you want to show? Or?
Yes, thank you, Aarti. As an opening, I would like to ask to play a short declassified video, clips from 4 of the Pacific Endeavour, and I'll give an overview of what this program is. So how it starts is US Pacific Command has found that preparedness for disaster relief is very vital and important. Under preparedness as a head, there are multiple areas. Communication is one of them. And as Aarti said, SATCOM is an integral part of relief, rehabilitation, reconstruction. So in case of a natural, with all kinds of climate changes, natural disaster occurrence has increased multifold. Initially, a couple of years back, there were 1 or 2 disasters. Now there are 9 disasters of big and small scale, right from a big tsunami to an earthquake to a small eruption. So that being said, let's have a quick look at the video, and then I'll talk more on the preparedness. Could you please start the video?
Pacific Endeavour was created with this in mind. This annual workshop, organized under the Multinational Communications Interoperability Program, or MCIP, is designed to ensure countries in the Asia-Pacific region can communicate during these HADR operations. MCIP promotes and is committed to the spirit of collaboration among the military, international humanitarian community, and telecom industry to promote the use of communications technology as an essential service to facilitate humanitarian relief.
In the case of a humanitarian disaster, swift global communication is essential to save lives. One of the quickest ways to get a response is satellite communications, or SATCOM. However, challenges are different technologies and procedures between countries. At Pacific Endeavour 2012 in Singapore, 22 countries across the Pacific region gathered with a focus to bridge the gap to alleviate suffering at the time of crisis.
So we use satellite communications across humanitarian assistance, disaster relief efforts. We go in and we're able to immediately set up communications through our satellite comms links. That's our transport, because in most cases, fiber optic cables are going to be out, undersea cables might be out, so we rely on SATCOM 35,000 kilometers away from the Earth's surface.
It's global, so no matter where you are, you're able to have some form of communication. And if all of the normal telecommunication systems have been wiped out through whatever means, you've got some rapidly deployable equipment that you know can have very quick and effective communications.
By adding the SATCOM course to Pacific Endeavor, the international community can be better prepared in times of disaster, allowing relationships to help facilitate quicker responses.
That we can all work together for one common goal, and that's in an emergency response is it's all about preserving life and helping out as best as we all can.
It's important because we get to do partnerships and work together, whether it's the online training that we did here or out here in the field and setting up the terminals. And plus you make friendships.
Exercise participants completed course certifications, qualifying them to pass on what they've learned to other specialists in their respective countries. Air Force Staff Sergeant Mary Deaver, Changi Naval Base, Singapore.
Endeavor 2014.
When nations join together for a humanitarian assistance or disaster relief operation, they know that their communication systems will work together and that the people know what the procedures are and how to do that.
The Global VSAT Forum conducted modules that allow participants to receive commercial SATCOM installation and operation certificates.
National Communications Interoperability Program and its capstone event, Pacific Endeavor.
MSIP is a multilateral program within US PACOM. Its job is to go out and engage with the multilateral partners within the Pacific AOR. Specifically, we engage them on communications, interoperability, problems, solutions, and standards as it relates to humanitarian assistance and disaster response events.
Pacific Endeavor is one channel where the military sector is opening up in the spirit of collaboration with the civilian sector towards saving the human race. The whole activity, the whole Pacific Endeavor experience is exciting.
SATCOM Endeavor focused on the fundamentals of SATCOM terminal operations and practical techniques. The Global VSAT Forum conducted modules that allowed participants to receive commercial SATCOM installation and operation certificates.
One of the main things that we do is to show the nations how to set up a multinational military coordination cell, to establish that communication cell early and then be able to call in other nations for support.
Pacific Endeavor 2017 brought together 20 partner nations to San Jose, California. This marked the first time the U.S. Pacific Command hosted a Pacific Endeavor exercise in the continental United States. The exercise focuses on leveraging technology between military, civilian, and non-governmental organizations working in the cyber, electromagnetic spectrum, and satellite communication domains.
It allows us to come together, build partnerships, and more importantly, build process and procedures that can be used for disaster preparedness and response.
The two-week capstone event also provides an opportunity for partner nation members to work together during classroom and field exercises that are a part of the Cyber and SATCOM Endeavor modules.
SATCOM Endeavor focuses on the satellite communication so that any nation, for any disaster, they could easily use this communication to facilitate the disaster response activities.
All of this in an effort to save lives.
So we have been very happy, and I would like to proudly share that India is a signatory to this Pacific Endeavour program. And I have been associated since 2012 onwards. Year over year, we have been doing these 2 weeks exercise. It's a joint military exercise for non-military purpose, basically for saving human lives. The fundamental of starting this exercise is for preparedness. Now, in case of a natural disaster, military is the first responder. Thereafter comes the Interior Ministry, Home Ministry, and all other governmental agencies and NGOs. Now, the challenge is, say, for instance, the earthquake in Nepal, Indian military would also go, and other neighborhood militaries would also go. Military necessarily has a high level of encrypted equipments and solutions for their own security purpose. So US government started this MSIP program, Multinational Communication Interoperability Program. So at one level, they can talk together and be prepared, trained, and once they deploy, immediately relief can be done. Now relief starts from initially the satellite imagery. Say for instance of an earthquake, where the problem is, where the maximum relief is required, and where you can go and start the center and take it forward. So it starts from satellite imagery and then goes from 0 to 24 hours. It's the satellite phone, and then the manpacks and other terminals go in. So this is one facet of preparedness, is what I wanted to share with this audience. And Aarti, if you have anything further, we can take it forward.
Perfect. Thank you so much for setting the scene with that. Riaz, let me just explore with you for a second before we come to Harriet. Riaz, the satellite industry made an awful lot of effort to set up the Crisis Connectivity Charter. This was in a bid to overcome the ad hoc approach to disasters. And we know that it's given vitally needed predictability to the NGOs who were otherwise just hoping to receive capacity from operators and reaching out to them on an ad hoc basis every time there was a disaster. However, in order to benefit from the Charter, a country affected needs to trigger it. That means it needs to declare an emergency. So if we bring this topic back to the Indian context, we know that India is actually not very good at declaring emergencies at times of disaster. There's often security concerns around the use of satellite phones, and we know that satellite phones are absolutely critical when it comes to the initial, immediate aftermath of a disaster. Can you comment on that? What are your thoughts around this?
Sure, I'll give an overview first on Crisis Connectivity Charter and then answer your question. Satellite operators got together to sign this Crisis Connectivity Charter coordinated by GSOA, earlier EOSO, and GVF. So internationally, WFP ETC is the largest logistic entity in the world for logistic movements, and therefore they have been tasked by the UN to do ETC as well, that is Emergency Telecommunication Cluster. That being said, in case of any natural disaster, ETC first looks at it whether the charter needs to be activated or not. Suppose if it's a small nature of the disaster and in-country resources can fulfill, then the charter is not activated. But once the charter is activated, then GVF and GSOA together with the member signatories, the satellite operators, they are, right from satellite phones to the full-scale operators, they have a single point of contact, and through that, the activation takes place. Now, what is this activation? So within the charter, the signatories have kept X number of terminals. Someone has given 50 terminals, someone has given 100 terminals, someone has given 10 terminals on different bands, C band, KU, K, whatever. They have been kept at the WPC warehouse in Dubai and in Brindisi. And in case of the charter gets activated, then it's already again prepared and pre-planned that every place on Earth has some other of these signatory satellite operators having a footprint there. So if the charter is activated, the equipments are immediately sent to that location, and the satellite operator immediately switches on the bandwidths on those terminals. So all that is done within 24 hours of activation. So that is how the communication is put in place. Now, this is given, the bandwidth is given, whatever committed bandwidth, pre-committed bandwidth is given free of cost for a limited period, say 2 months, 3 months, whatever has been signed. Thereafter, WFP and the in-country resources has a right to continue and pay for the bandwidth, further bandwidth, or the terminals are taken off. So this is the general concept of this crisis connectivity charter. Now that being said, once the equipments were given, I had the privilege to be on the ground to train all the people from WFP on different platforms which were given. The equipments were different, the antenna sizes were different, the modems were different, and we trained to get the preparedness in place. Now, coming to Aarti's question of how we can leverage and utilize this facility for doing it in India. Number one is India by itself is very strong as far as response to disasters are concerned. So for that reason, we have the resources ourselves. ISRO team provides connectivity, and the other government agencies. So therefore, for security reasons and other things, we first would like to exhaust our resources and then go to the next step. But that being said, again, charter can definitely benefits of charter can definitely be taken up. Now, one of the biggest challenge which the charter sees in not just India but most of the countries is the express regulatory clearances, because that's one area which needs to be addressed by the individual governments, and then once it is considered, then it becomes fairly easy to deploy and utilize the benefits of the charter. So that's one aspect, because why I'm saying this is, we have seen that when there was a disaster in Japan, within 24 hours, the regulatory clearance was given for all the equipments coming in for use for the relief and rehabilitation. So similarly, those things can definitely be considered. Another pointer to your question is, since yesterday and otherwise, we have been hearing senior government officials and ministers saying that the new policy is coming which will open up telecom and space. So I'm quite sure that that should cover this aspect of utilizing the crisis connectivity charter and the benefits for the country.
Thank you, Riaz. I think it's very important to remember that, while we're here discussing technologies and policies, at the end of the day, it's the user, it's the consumer, it's the citizen that matters, especially in a topic like this.
Very true.
So, Harriet, if I can bring you in, you run market analysis and business intelligence in this field at the European Space Agency. We all know that globally the consequences of climate change are taking effect. Disasters are scaling up, sadly. What do you see in terms of future trends? What is the outlook here from your perspective?
Thank you, Aarti, and it's a real pleasure to be here today. So in terms of future trends, I think there's a number of things to speak to. We're in a growing awareness and action towards addressing climate change, but unfortunately we're seeing an increasing number of natural disasters around the world, and that's growing in frequency and intensity. So our need to be able to prevent and react to such natural disasters is critical. I wanted to add also that I think it's particularly timely that we're having this discussion right after the panel around international collaboration, because we've also talked a lot about the need to come together, communicate. I think you've highlighted incredibly well some of the examples of how these are very often international issues that require coordination and preparation across different countries as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, we all know that the role that satellites can play in the mitigation of and response to disasters, but how is the European Space Agency addressing this topic? Are there any new tools being put in place to ensure a better response, an improved response from the satellite sector?
Yeah, absolutely. So the European Space Agency is a civilian organization. So we work across a number of different areas to support industry and technology development that can be supportive of disaster management and protection of critical infrastructure. So at the moment in our Telecommunication and Integrated Applications Directorate, we have a strategic focus on space for safety and security. And so this is a real priority for us in terms of being able to develop key technologies, but also deploy and demonstrate those capabilities such that they can be used in disaster situations, both to support European citizens, but also global applications as well. We're also working on an initiative, which is one of our proposed accelerator programs within Europe, which is looking at rapid and resilient crisis response. And I think this builds on what you were saying previously, which is that there's a huge role for space technology and satellite applications to play in terms of disaster management. But one of the areas where we have more opportunity to grow and build is really on the integration of different systems, whether it's combining terrestrial or satellite services, or combining different types of data, whether it's observation, navigation, or communications, by being able to create more integrated and federated systems, you can use that information more effectively in a crisis situation.
Thank you. And if I can just stay with you for a second, ESA has launched these accelerator programs, and there is a specific accelerator on crisis response. What difference is that going to make compared with the status quo that we see right now?
Yeah, exactly. So the idea of the accelerator programs within ESA is really well, it's in the name, right? We're looking to accelerate key areas that we see of being strategic importance, not just to the space industry, but to the global priorities and the priorities that we see more generally, and understanding the role that space can play in those. So the Rapid and Resilient Crisis Response Accelerator, whilst has been initiated by the European Space Agency, our ambition is to bring together a much broader set of stakeholders to help develop technologies, capabilities, integrate services, to do that on a much broader scale than we at one space agency can do alone.
Thank you. Riaz, can I come back to you? I just wanted to get your feel. You have a lot of experience. You've been working in this sector for a long time, especially on the training side. But if we take a slightly broader view, right now the satellite sector is seeing unprecedented innovation. NGSOs are coming up, mega constellations, LEO broadband systems. What role do you think that NGSO systems will play in disaster response? Because, I mean, it's really a field where the NGOs want a tried and trusted technology. They have been relying on GEO systems and VSAT systems for many, many years. Do you see this changing in the next, I don't know, 3 to 5 years' time, or not?
Definitely, especially in disaster response area, it's never one solution that serves everything. We need to have multiple platforms, multiple connectivity, whether it's last mile or otherwise. Certain connectivity links may not work at all. Say, for instance, a terrestrial wire line, which might get snapped and gone, but wireless would definitely operate with its own limitations. So that being said, we have been using GSO GEO satellites. Now with LEO and high throughput coming in, once that matures and we really experience its usage, definitely that can be leveraged for HADR as well. So, I mean, once the technology starts getting implemented and being used successfully, definitely people would use it for every application. That includes HADR as well.
Okay, and you know, whenever there's a disaster, no matter where it is in the world, it's on the news, we know about it. Yet, in a country like India, it's sometimes hard to see where an emergency or a disaster ends and where a long-term development need really begins, so a more sustained emergency. And I wanted to ask whether you think that enough is being done to address these longer-term emergencies. What can the government do to ensure more and speedier deployment of solutions like satellite when they're needed across the country?
In case of a disaster, once, see, we know that there are phases of a disaster. First, the disaster strikes, people move away from the epicenter to save lives. The media comes around and covers and creates a situation where it says that yes, this is a damage which has happened. And then the government and the government agencies come in first for relief. So there's a phase of relief, then comes rehabilitation and reconstruction, depending on the severity of the natural disaster which is struck. So accordingly, the government recalibrates and tries to put in resources for rehabilitation and then reconstruction. So that is a normal process which happens. And therefore, communication being the vital part starts right from the disaster striking and then continues and grows in that area for rehabilitation and therefore reconstruction. So in rehabilitation, for example, telehealth services start immediately because that's one part. So maybe from one location, multiple locations. Second is enabling internet, because what is happening now, a big shift which we have been observing, say in case of a natural disaster striking, two things happen. One is cyber attacks increases multifolds. That's another animal to handle. And then once relief starts, from telehealth to even enabling internet so that people can post on social media about their well-being, whether they are good, they are safe, things are fine. So near and dear ones away knows how it is. That is how the communication is happening nowadays. Plus, the NGO and the relief agencies also keep on updating the requirements. There's a terminology called donor fatigue. To avoid that, this is how information is collated. So the relief, whether it's government or military or NGOs, know what is the actual requirement, and that is what is being sent. But all that happens through internet and through enabling availability of internet, which again comes through satellite connectivity.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question to both of you. Harriet, perhaps you give your spin on the collaboration, international collaboration here. We see a lot of reports and guidelines coming out around climate change and how to anticipate it, or disaster relief, how to mitigate, prevent, respond. If you look at the ITU in 2020, 2021, we saw 3 sets of guidelines: the National Emergency Telecom Plan guidelines, the pandemic guidelines, the long-term connectivity guidelines. Access Partnership came out with a report and recommendations, the World Bank, the OECD. I mean, in any given year, there are more reports, more guidelines, more recommendations. What, in my view, the challenge is translating those into actual actions nationally. What do you see as happening in the case of India? Do you see any of these being implemented or put into some kind of framework in the Indian context where you have experience, Riaz? And Harriet, for you, what do you think, how do you think ESA can help? Is there scope for collaboration to help implementation and make a difference on the ground? Which of you would like to start?
Yeah, I can give a kind of more general overview and an ESA perspective to kick things off. So I think the policies, guidelines are incredibly important, right? Because it means we're starting to have those conversations, you're opening up that dialogue, and you're starting from a common framework of understanding on how to address these issues. But I completely agree, there's a transition from intent to action to implementation, and that's where we really need to see that development. One of the things that we do a lot at the European Space Agency is we co-fund technology developments with industry. So these are very much industry, public-private partnerships where we have industry-led initiatives to develop technologies and capabilities that have the commercial opportunities or market potential to make these a self-sustaining technology that can be implemented and used in the future. So I can give a couple of concrete examples of that in terms of recent initiatives that we've developed that give practical implementation and also work all the way up to demonstration, right? So you're looking at really seeing how these can be implemented on the ground. So one of those is called SES 5G. So this is looking at sustainable environment supervising using 5G enabled technologies with satellite. And the idea is to use integrated, and coming back to that integration between terrestrial and satellite services to contribute to the reduction of the impact that fires have across Europe. So being able to use a combination of data inputs to manage, monitor, and mitigate the risk that you see from fires and natural disasters. We've also been working on a flood-prone area analysis tool in collaboration again with an industry partner. And the idea there is to, again, be able to develop technology and capabilities that can be used to mitigate the flood risk in scenarios, so both the prevention and the reaction to certain situations. So it's really about being able to put those guidelines into practice and create demonstratable technologies that can be commercially leveraged in the future.
Brilliant, thank you. Riaz, can I bring you in?
Yeah, sure. In my opinion, all the guidelines which are there are, see, HADR preparedness is a moving target. So once you experience something, you refine and define and refine it further, which the governments also do and various international agencies also do from experience. And that is how the guidelines are forecasted or based on the experiences. And therefore, Government of India also has a very standard and robust plan laid out for support in case of natural disasters. And that would be in every area, not just communication as a last mile. So that being said, these guidelines, international guidelines issued by agencies, is also a good point of reference that if someone has learned something, we should adopt it. And that's how the government works and gets it going, if I've answered your question right.
Brilliant, thank you. You know, I think we need to end in a second, but I just wanted to ask you, if there was one recommendation that you would give to governments, to a government like India, what would it be?
I would say that should allow the industry and the NGO for a quick access from communication standpoint in case of a natural disaster and get more involved and collaborated with the government.
Excellent, thank you. Harriet?
If I can just build on that a little bit, I think one of the really incredible things I've seen from this conference has been the number of startups that have been represented and smaller companies, and also the encouragement across the conference to engage the industry in addressing these priorities for India. So my recommendation would be really leverage that innovation that you have within the country to help with developing these solutions.
Thank you. I'd like to bring in Paul Feber from CTO of the Satellite Applications Catapult. Paul, please.
Thank you, Aarti. I have a question relating to the context for the session as well, which not only talks about disaster response, but infrastructure resilience as well. And one of the things I'm recognizing, this is a fantastic initiative that's been established by the operators to provide this capability, but it feels like it's done by exception as opposed to perhaps a capacity enhancement as required. Is there any perspective on what we need to do to make sure that civil response in country is ready and all the time and using this kind of capability, satellite capability, to improve their delivery of services to citizens that could be bolstered by additional boosting capacity, for instance?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think it's a really important part of the discussion, right? You've got emergency response, which is, low probability, high impact events, but you also have resilience of infrastructure, which is an ongoing challenge to maintain that protection, right? So it's a different type of challenge that you're engaging with. I think there's still very much a role for satellites to play. It's something that we very much see as a priority at the European Space Agency. So with the space for safety and security, that's a key element of that, and that's something we're looking at building on in the future with looking at how we can grow the applications and technologies around civil security for space, including the protection of infrastructure as well.
I think I would also come in on that. You know, Riaz, you talked about lessons learned and building on that. The UK learned some very good lessons, and I really think that they should be replicated across multiple other countries. When there were floods across the UK, I don't remember, maybe close to 10 years ago, the government implemented an emergency services network, and they required BT, the national telco, to ensure, I think it was 94% coverage, and the only way for BT to do that was to install satellite across maybe 1,000 sites across the UK. Now, whereas they did it due to a service obligation or a requirement imposed by the government, in real terms, BT says that what we realized as a telco was that this significantly improved the uptime of our network. So de facto improved the resilience of their network. If BT experiences that, I'm sure that many other MNOs would have the same experience, and I don't know why there isn't more policy pushing for this kind of requirement, first on coverage, but basically with a resilience requirement behind it. Thank you for that question, it was superb. Tony Azzarelli, can I give the floor to you for comment?
Thank you, great panel, great speakers, thank you. I'm really glad that I'm part of this community that provides this kind of connectivity for the benefit of humankind. I didn't hear nothing about Earth observation and the use of this kind of type of technologies that would aid also in the endeavors in this kind of situations. I know the European Union and Copernicus are providing some kind of means of free access to images, basically. But does India have something similar, or a part of international community endeavors on Earth observation, for example? Thank you.
I can take it. I was hearing, I cannot speak on behalf of the government, but yesterday I was listening to some of the speakers, government officials, who were mentioning that they have a big repository of satellite imagery, and once the new policy comes, that would also be made available in a proper manner for use for the public. So that's what, as an indicator, I can mention.
Okay, we have one last question, and then two questions, and then we close. Thank you.
Probably I can add to that what Mr. Tony said. India is part of Sentinel Asia and the international charter under which the satellite images are exchanged in the event of any natural disaster. So already India is part of that arrangement. Wherever it happens, the satellite images are and a quick response, it's shared.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rayappa. He's the Director SATCOM at ISRO headquarters.
Thank you for that. Indeed, we have UNOSAT, which is very active, and also I think it's the UN Spider program, which is also providing imagery, right, at times of disaster. I think we have a question from Venkat. Venkat, yes. You've been very active in all of the sessions. Let's hear it from you now.
Okay, thank you. So actually, again, just like I've said every time, I'm thankful and fortunate to be here in this event. And let's quickly jump into my question. Actually, if you see on a scale, this question is for Mr. Riaz. If you see on a scale, we are taking like 24 hours to deploy help on whatever country that has declared it. So my question is that won't 24 hours be too much? Because if you see it on a scale, at ground zero, when the disaster happens, it of course destroys everything, and after that 24 hours would be just too much to give relief. And when you check on cases that that are really intense, like tragedy of the nuclear power plant, 24 hours is a lot of time. So how are we planning to protect the people in that case?
Thank you very much. A very intelligent question. See, what happens is, if there is a natural disaster, it comes to a peak and then settles down. From that point onwards, the relief and rehabilitation, first responder can go in. So that being said, once this happens, it is being monitored, and then the government of the land immediately, once it's easy to approach, the first responder goes, whether they go by air or road or whichever way. Now, the 24 hours which I mentioned was with respect to the Crisis Connectivity Charter, to activate and then send the resources from the UN agencies. So there are two different things. The government immediately responds ASAP the moment a disaster strikes and the moment a person can go there. And then this follows up.
Okay, got it. And another question. Government is, you know, a little, how do I say it, a keychain. Like when you strike a disaster on one side of the keychain, it takes time to go to the other side. And it depends on what government we are talking about, how developed the country is. And in a few cases, it could be really slow, as if like a long keychain. And that would basically mean that the strike of the disaster, the button literally to strike the disaster can be too late. So what will we do in that case?
Well, when there is a disaster, see, every country is always prepared in different ways to anticipate a disaster and provide relief. So in our country, if we talk about our country, the concerned departments like NDMA, NDIM, whatever, Home Ministry, they have a network of centers for providing first responders and relief. So the nearest entity from the place where the disaster strike would send the deployment teams.
Got it.
Thank you.
And if I can come in on this as well, Venkat, you know, in theory, every country has such a plan. And they may have it in theory, but the point is, to your first question, how quickly can it be deployed? Are the people deployed able, are they trained in the use of this equipment? Is the equipment actually available there? Is capacity, satellite capacity, available for use there? This is why one of the most important challenges that the satellite industry faces is to convince governments to build satellite communications capabilities into their national emergency telecoms plans as is status quo. And every year they should be doing simulations to, does it work? Do we have people who know how it works? And so on and so forth. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. And last question. Last question. What if, war strikes between the two countries? When I say two countries, the two countries that are part of the, part of the camp that are trying to relieve. So if we imagine the two countries fighting for some reasons, then what could happen and how could it impact the, whole program?
Well, there are two types of disasters, natural disaster and man-made disaster. We would limit our discussions now in this panel for natural disasters and how we can provide relief. So that what you're asking is for a different thing. Maybe at a different forum we can discuss on that.
No, like in the sense what I mean is that if if some bad thing were to strike and a war would happen, I'm not saying the disaster that causes the war, I'm saying the impacts that can cause the whole program when 2 countries or 3 countries that are part of the program are, fighting with each other.
Well, I really didn't get your question. Yeah, we can take it offline,
Let's
please.
take the question offline. Yeah? Thank you very much. Okay,
Yeah.
Anilji, can I give you the floor?
Thank you. I think this has turned out to be very good, but as originally we planned, we wanted to have the health secretary here, the secretary Andy, who happened to be co-chair of CDRI and also chair of CDRI. And so we planned that Aarti was supposed to be moderating that. So the SIA-India is a signing MOU with CDRI. We understand that when globally ITU on the world, UN level, the work is going around to help around. So by the time they reach, I think his question is very valid. I was astounded that he could foresee that kind of a disaster. So response time, to quicken the response time, so we wanted to generate Indian resources with the help of ISRO and the number of satellite players, so we can reach out to disaster-prone area much quicker than the international response team arrive. So we are in dialogue with them, and very soon we are going to come out. There is already planned by, there is a National Disaster Management Authority, by way of fact, is already doing that, and they are really doing a good thing, but they have to do a number of things. So the good part is that now the satellite imagery which we have now from this, thanks to ISRO, that we could assess the disaster which is going to happen, and we evacuate people from there. It so happened on Uttarakhand, which is a foot of hills where we have announced so that we could remove, and some of the cyclonic affected area like Odisha and southern part of India where Tamil Nadu and Kerala is there, so we could evacuate people much in advance to go. So I think his question is very valid. We are building up the response team which could, in local area and the national, that's what I want to share with you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so please join me in thanking our panelists for what was a very interesting closing discussion, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harriet and Mr. Riaz, as well as I'd like to thank Ms. Aarti for handling the session very well. Thank you very much again for joining us.